The LGBTQ rights movement in the United States has seen huge progress in the last century and especially the last 2 decades. However, the road to get there was very bumpy. The 1950s were perilous times for individuals who fell outside society's legally allowed norms relating to gender or sexuality. Over the previous few years, more than 4,380 gay men and women had been discharged from the military and around 500 more fired from their jobs with the government. This event became known as the Lavender Scare. The Lavender Scare was a moral panic during the mid 20th century about homosexual people in the United States government and their mass dismissal from government service. This policy destroyed the careers of many LGBTQ Americans in the 1950s to the 1960s. In April of 1952, the American Psychiatric Association lists homosexuality as a sociopathic personality disturbance. And in April of 1953, President Dwight Eisenhower signs executive order banning homosexuals from working for the federal government or any of its private contractors. On July 4th, 1965, at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, protesters began staging the first reminder day to call public attention to the lack of civil rights for LGBT people. The gathering will continue annually for 5 years. Although receiving minimal local news coverage, the event will be credited as starting the fire behind America's modern LGBTQ rights movement. Later in 1969, the Gay Activist Alliance formed in New York by a group whose purpose was more political, and they wanted to secure basic human rights, dignity, and freedom for all gay people. They will continue to become the most influential gay liberation political activist organization
The
in the
time
early
period from
1970s.
1970 to 2000 was a crucial turning point in the LGBTQ movement. The first Gay Liberation March was held in NYC in 1970 and was led by Craig Rodwell. During the 1970s, many groups like the Lesbian and Gay Asian Alliance, Salsa Soul Sisters, and Lesbianas Unidas fought for both homosexuality and racism, and how both of these subjects were being poorly treated in society. In 1977, Harvey Milk became the first openly gay person to be elected into office, in a public office, in San Francisco. During the 1980s, doctors found problems in mainly homosexual and bisexual males, and 70% of them, and the people who had, they coined the term gay cancer, which was also called GRID at the time. It was of 70% of the cases were either homosexual or
During the 2000s, change
bisexual
started
men.
to come for LGBTQ Americans. The next decade saw a whirlwind of activity on the gay marriage front, beginning with the year 2000, when Vermont became the first state in the U.S. to legalize civil unions and registered partnerships between same sex couples. 3 years later, Massachusetts became the first state to legalize gay marriage when the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that same sex couples had the right to marry in Goodridge v. Department of Public Health, a ruling that, unlike Hawaii's, wouldn't be overturned by voters. The state finally introduced the country to gay marriage when it began issuing same-sex marriage license on May 17, 2004. 2004 was significant for couples in many other states as well, for some the opposite reason, because 10 typically conservative states, along with Oregon, enacted state-level bans on gay marriage. Kansas and Texas were next in 2005, and in 2006 saw 7 more states passing constitutional amendments against gay marriage. The early 2010s continued the state-level bans over gay marriage that defined the preceding decade, with at least one notable event. For the first time in the country's history, voters in Maine, Maryland, and Washington approved constitutional amendments permitting same-sex marriage in 2012. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that all state bans on same-sex marriage were unconstitutional, making gay marriage legal throughout America. In 2018, the Pentagon confirms that the first transgender person has signed a contract to join the U.S. military. In 2020, the Supreme Court rules that the federal law protects LGBTQ workers from discrimination. The U.S. Supreme Court affirmed in Bostock v. Clayton County that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964's prohibition on sex discrimination in employment prohibits discrimination because of sexual orientation and gender identity. Still to this day, many LGBTQ Americans face challenges every day because of discrimination.